and gentlemen, very happy to welcome you to this common event at COP23, a common event which unites ENTSO-E. It's the European Network of Transmission System Operator. It's the big transmission lines all across Europe. We have also IRENA, which is the International Renewable Energy Association, which is one of the co-hosts of COP23. Very happy to have BEUC, which is the European Customer Organization. Very happy to have WindEurope, Giles Dickson, heading WindEurope in Brussels. To have Olivier Corradi, who is a startup and I would say a true European, Danish, French, having set up the electricity map and tomorrow. And last but not least, we also have Steven Singer, who is the co-founder of RGI, the Renewables Grid Initiative, uniting NGOs, and on the other hand, uniting the transmission system operators. So this group has united as to address the following topic. We want to talk about the customer and COP23. Is COP23 only something which is for governments, for administrations, or is there something in for customers, and how could they take action themselves, engage, and deliver on the climate agenda as to avoid more than a 2-degree temperature increase, as this is the final objective. Yeah? We're very happy to see you all here. We are a growing number of people. We know that the assembly will be stopping in 5 minutes, so you might lose your privileged status in 5 minutes. So you should exploit it and ask ourselves indeed questions. I'm Susanne from ENTSO-E. I will moderate this event, and we will start off with presentations of the participants introducing how they see the active customer enabling COP23. And my first speaker here is Merce representing the energy team at BEUC and presenting indeed this topic of renewable energy. So you're the renewable energy project officer at BEUC. How can customers engage in COP23? Thanks. Merci. Yeah, you can go here. Or whatever.
Yeah. Hi, thank you very much for organizing this. It's very exciting. It's my first time in COP23, well, in COP in general, not only 23. And it's very good to be able to be the voice of consumers, at least the European consumers, in this topic. As Susanne mentioned, my name is Merce. I'm a renewable energy project officer in BEUC. BEUC is a European organization that is the umbrella in Brussels of 43 consumer organizations in 31 European countries. So that includes EU countries, but also countries where that are in the EEA or they are in application process to the EU. And they are well respected. I know this is a very international public, so I'm not sure how familiar you are, but consumer organizations in Europe are very well respected. They're well known, and they're quite a big source of information for most people. So it's a point of contact in many European countries. And hence this speech I'm going to do about tools to let people act and inform them better, but also what we've learned in the process that are all other barriers maybe outside information on people acting. And I don't know how I turn my slides. There's a clicker. In the middle.
Okay. And in the meantime, I would be happy if all the others would just come. Yeah, Giles, Olivier, you're feeling a little alone here. Yeah?
I feel very lonely. This is like a group
Steven,
effort. Yeah. Just to say as well, we deal with many things that are not electricity the same way that consumers deal with many things that are not electricity. And you might hear around consumers being active. Consumers are active. They might not be active in this market in particular. That doesn't mean they're not active. If you think about your everyday choices on insurances, transportation, education, food, electrodomestics, housing, mortgages, and so on, you realize how much decisions go every day and every year in a consumer's lives. And maybe that determines why they need specific ways of thinking. And second, we deal with individual consumers, not industry that are also final consumers, and they might also have their own way to be active. But in this case, I'm speaking about households. And two projects we had that we've worked on. One deals with people wanting to install renewables in their house. I will speak about that a bit in a second. It's called Clear. And the second is about people that might want to become active in buying renewables directly through their suppliers. So choosing an electricity, well, tariff, I was told, is not the right word here, but an electricity package that includes mostly renewable energy, and whether they have the right tools to do that. So on Clear project, this is a project that we did with 6 different countries in the first phase, and then we had a couple of additions in the second phase that just started in September. And we're looking at many technologies that are renewable. So we look at solar panels, but also we're looking at heat pumps, at pellet stoves, and so on. And we try to understand what is it that the consumer knows about that technology and how comfortable they are with those technologies. And we realize that photovoltaic is the technology that they know the best and feel more comfortable, where some of the other technologies are quite unknown. In the second phase, we're also looking at batteries and optimization systems, so systems that allow you to consume less or at better times in better ways. And those technologies are also at the bottom of the pile. So there's quite a wide variety of knowledge between European consumers on the different ways they can engage in more sustainable energy consumption. What they value, and that's quite interesting for some of the policymakers around, generally is to lower their energy costs, so become more independent on the cost of their supplier and generate their own to reduce their overall household costs. And second, environmental conscience. There's some people that believe they do it because they get a lot of money out of their investments. This comes 5th in their priority list, and it's only 25% that say they do it to become an investment. Most of it, they see it as a saving rather than a way to make money. I mean, you can discuss whether it's the same or not, but that's how consumers perceive it, at least. We've looked at the barriers that they have, and some of them have to do with purchase prices, limited knowledge of the technology, as I was saying. They also see some of the regulations around uncertain. If you are in Europe, you might have heard of the case of Spain, where they had a certain framework and certain costs to connect to the grid that they changed halfway through an investment of people. Some people might lose their debt even, in a way, like they got a debt for the bank, they installed their solar panels, and halfway through they couldn't pay their debt. So they see that as a risk, and then they don't engage as much. And some people see that there might be a loss of temporary comfort. That might sound a bit silly, but it's a case that they think maybe I have to have people for 20 days in my house and go in the roof, and it will be a hassle, and maybe I don't get electricity in between, I have to find another house, so on and so forth. So the ways that the project Clear looked into was to provide more information and knowledge, and at the bottom you will see some of the ways we did that, so both in the knowledge of the technology and what you need to do in your household. We did that through the magazines that our members publish. We created special online forums for people to engage. I don't know the results by memory, but I see there it's 1 million visits on the websites, 2.2 million page views on the communities, and 800,000 sessions. And then the magazine's website's 1 million, as I said. We also did face-to-face and group purchases. So the idea is that our organization will negotiate for them the price of the rooftop, but also the price of the installation and maintenance of their RES system, so they don't have to think about what they need to negotiate in their contracts and terms and conditions, and they know they're getting a fair deal. And during those points, we also did like face-to-face and telephone information. So it was a whole package of information that was delivered through our consumer organization and contact points that was happening. But we also are engaging in trying to make legislation more stable at the European level to make sure that the other barriers that they see at least get diminished. And the next slide will speak about that. So the policy area, what we are trying to get is that the clean energy package enables self-consumption for all. We realize that some people get more problems than others. So the tenants and people in multi-story buildings, so flats, which are a big proportion of Europeans, have more difficulties to access, sometimes because the legislation didn't allow them in some countries like Germany, which recently changed the regulation. Others because they are asked to become an association to do so if you install something behind and you're many households. And also the other problem we saw with it's energy poverty, so most of the support schemes are for people that can afford buying the renewable schemes upfront and then get paid off by the electricity they put into the grid. But more generally, what we see that consumers would like to have, and that has worked in countries, is stability of the legislation and support schemes, even more at the level sometimes. That what they put into the grid, because as you know, consumers are not always home when the sun shines, so they need to put electricity into the grid, gets valued. They want an adapted administrative process that they don't have to go through the same permits as very big generation. We don't see that fit for purpose and maybe not necessary. And that the DSOs invest in the right infrastructure so that you can put more small generation into the grid. One thing that I didn't put there, and it's on the table a lot in Europe, is whether you have to make these consumers participate in the wholesale markets and balancing mechanisms. As it stands, we don't see they are ready. We don't see a small household putting very small electricity into the grid being able to engage directly with I'm already on time, with those type of markets. And maybe the last point I wanted to make, it's on green tariffs. So maybe that's more straightforward. There's a lot of untrust on whether your electricity is really green or not. Some consumers don't believe it. There's some countries where there's a lot of demand. If you look at Denmark, almost half of the people want a green tariff and are on a green tariff. But not all the countries have a way for people to know whether their tariff is green. So we know some price comparison tools. We know some countries are more able to provide that information, but what we thought it needs strengthened, and that it is more widespread so people can trust if they're buying electricity with clear, credible information, that it's transparent and traceable, the environmental claims that the supplier makes, and that they can compare offers on green tariffs. And I think that's my time.
Thank you very much, Merce. I think it was a good start trying to answer our question. Yeah, active customer enabling COP23. Your answer in a way is to say the customers in particular should be able to engage in renewables, have also self-consumption enabled by legislative measures, in this case on a European scale, but certainly, and trust, clearly important, yeah, but it's maybe not only the customer going on his own. There's maybe also ways to interact with an updated system after the energy transition. I think Bente can provide some answers here, speaking for ENTSO-E, the network of the transmission system operators at the power system in Europe.
Okay, now you can hear me. Good morning, everybody. My name is Bente Hagem, and I'm in the management of Statnett, the Norwegian transmission system operator, and also the chair of the board of ENTSO-E, the transmission system organization in Brussels. So we are talking about active customers enabling COP23. And I just want to say one thing first. We will not manage this energy transition without active customers. We don't want to protect them, we want them active. Maybe both. It's not... Okay.
It's the wrong presentation.
It's a wrong presentation. I cannot take others.
Perhaps you have to change to the third and then back to the second?
No. What's the point? Sorry.
It's maybe somebody should help him. Fine.
What's the problem?
Well, while he's searching for my presentation, I know that there are not just...
It's named correctly, but it's also like the first.
It's another date. It's a date. If you look at the date, it's...
Well, somebody gave me the wrong way. She has to search.
Let's maybe use then the opportunity. I'm very sorry for that. Yeah, I hope it goes fast. Yeah. Let's use this opportunity. If you have questions to the first presentation to Merce, you can maybe address this. Okay, please. Could you briefly introduce yourself and?
I'll try. Bettina Heller, I'm from UN Environment, and oh, great.
Sorry.
Thanks. Bettina Heller from UN Environment, and we are coordinating a global program on consumer information. And one of the things that we always face is also to see you provide the information, but does it actually then have an impact, and how do you measure that, and how do you account for behavior change? And I was wondering with your project if you looked into that.
So, not yet in that way. So the consumer organizations have a lot of experience on how to communicate at the more broader sense. What we are doing in the second phase, and I didn't have time, but we're trying to also do a more behavioral approach. So we will be monitoring a certain number of households. It's still on terms of reference, so I'm not going to say exactly the experiment because it's still being decided, but trying to provide different types of information to people and also see how that compares to more automated systems. And then see how that interplays as well. But as you say, behavioral science is not something you can predict. I'm a firm believer in experimentation and open. And this is the same with information about your green tariffs. Like most information goes through the bills, but we might start questioning ourselves, is that the best way to provide that particular information about additionality of your money into green projects? So yes, we're slowly getting there.
Sorry for this, not very, say, digital age, let's say. So then let's directly swap to Olivier Corradi, please. Yeah, this is the third presentation. And Olivier Corradi is the co-founder of Tomorrow. And Tomorrow is delivering digital tools to customers as to see how they can monitor, as to allow them to monitor the CO2 emissions. Olivier.
Thank you, Suzanne. So we're looking around us, and I've been trying to speak to a lot of people from my younger generation and try to understand what their feeling is towards this whole climate change problem. And most of them basically are interested. They see the news, they see hurricanes, they know we have to do something. They have absolutely no clue what to do. And so we created this company that tries to use the new digital tools to try to first quantify exactly the actions, the impact of all the actions we take on a daily scale, and then try to shift behaviors to something better. And so this is a bit something I'm going to talk about today. So our mission, we want to help humanity reach a sustainable state of existence, which is very, very bold, but we believe it can be done in a scalable manner if we start having this digital signal that makes it a commodity for everyone to understand, what is the carbon footprint of taking a flight, what is the carbon footprint of consuming some electricity right now. And if we can start expressing those things in a very, very subtle and beautiful, easy to understand way, then the consumer will react. And that's the part that we lack the most right now, is that people are not engaged because it's too complicated. You have to have a PhD in climate science if you want to understand those things. And we're never going to have this global change that we seek if we don't get everyone on board. So this is the way we approach those things. To be a bit more concrete, what we lack is sort of a signal in our daily life that tells us exactly what we should consume and what we shouldn't consume. And you could say the price signal is actually the best one we have. It's what directs humanity to produce more of something, or that tells people, please consume less of something because it's too expensive. The problem we have is that things that are good for the environment right now are not necessarily cheap. And for example, if you look at the cost of a plane ticket from Copenhagen to Paris, the last one I took was only about 20 euros. 20 euros, it's probably not a lot compared to my total budget. If you look at my carbon budget, it's almost 10%, 5 to 10% of my allowed carbon budget, if you do all the calculations, if we want to reach 2 degrees with the Paris Agreement. So this is a big problem. So how do we bridge this gap? Well, of course, we need a carbon tax, but how do we get something on a large scale that starts to make sense? Well, we need customers, we need everyone to be aware of exactly the climate cost of everything we do. It needs to be there every time we buy something. And so what we started building is something that visualizes electricity in real time. It's called the electricity map. And what this does is that it shows you in real time where your electricity comes from and how much carbon emissions come from the electricity that you're going to consume. I'm trying to give a demo here, but I might switch. Yes. Can I? Yeah. Thank you. So what you can see here is actually the wind pattern. So it's how much the wind blows. In principle, if you look at countries that have a lot of renewable energy, a lot of wind turbines, for example, Denmark, they should be very well affected by this high wind that we have right now. We can see that Denmark is a bit green. I'm going to try to zoom in if I can. Maybe I can't here. No zoom in. Okay. I'm just going to click on Denmark here. And what you can see here is that you have the wind, the amount of wind that is currently blowing. This is the full capacity. So we have a lot of wind being produced in Denmark right now. We can see the history over the past 24 hours. We can see all the imports and the exports here. So for example, here on the top, the Danes are currently balancing their energy system or the electricity system using imports from Sweden that are rather green right now. It's only 53 grams per kilowatt hour imported. Nuclear. So, sorry?
Nuclear, yes.
Yes, so actually how does Sweden produce electricity? And then you can look here and they produce with nuclear, hydro and wind. So what this allows us to do is that basically we're able to compute the physical origin of electrons over a country and say if you were to charge your phone, use a heat pump or whatever, then your electricity would come from that place, would have emitted that much. And we started utilizing ENTSO-E data to actually start computing all of those things. And now this project expanded so much that we got a full community of people involved, coding and helping us get open data with those things. We have approximately 200 people registered helping us and approximately 20 people active on this thing. And so we started adding Latin America here. We have parts of India coming up. We have Australia and we have New Zealand here. So this is a bit what we believe is some of the answers we can bring to customers. And now this is nearly not enough because you want to know what is your personal carbon footprint of consuming electricity at the right time. And when we believe that when we start addressing those things, then people will shift behaviors. Can we switch back to the presentation, please? Yes. Good. So it's just a small clip of everything that we saw on social media related to this project. We're very proud that it actually kicked a lot and sparked a lot of interest. We have 3,000 users daily coming to this website, still 1 year after it's been launched. We've never done a single drop of marketing, so it shows that people care about those things if you just show it in a way that's intuitive enough. We have professors using it in their curriculum at universities and high school. So this is exactly what we wanted. We wanted to get this thing out there so that people get educated about the fact that, for example, the wind doesn't always blow and that the right question to ask is, what do we do when the wind doesn't blow? Well, we need storage systems or we need higher interconnections. And so all those things start to become a little bit more intuitive. Based on this, we're building a business. The business is that we sell historical data. We have a live API where we have forecasts on those things that enable, for example, demand response. And we have specialized insights. We publish reports on those things. And this platform enables us to go and build even more things that are interesting for the customer. For example, we're starting to build interfaces, chat interfaces that would allow you to tell your Google Home device, simply asking it, how green is my electricity today? Is the wind blowing? How is my neighbor producing electricity, for example? Those are the things we want to get into. And the biggest paradigm shift I think we're going to see, a bit like we saw before, is that customers are going to have to be involved, and we have to involve them just to have all the demand response systems able to accommodate a high share of renewable. If you want that, you want every IoT device, every device that's connected to the internet, will need to get a signal in order to know when is it a good time to consume and when is it a bad time to consume. If we activate all this flexibility, we estimate from the first studies we've done that you can already save 10% of carbon emissions just by consuming at the right time. This is a project we're doing already right now in Denmark, where we have heat pumps responding to the forecast we give, such that they can plan ahead. They can preheat the home because they know the electricity carbon intensity is going to be higher later on. And so they can adapt in time. And we need this built into every flexible system. Heating system, it's a quite flexible one. You don't care if your heater turns off for 1 hour as long as the house stays warm. And if you're well insulated, well, it will work. Second very big system, and this is the end of my talk, is going to be electric vehicles, basically a battery on wheels. So you want it to charge at the right time. And second thing, with V2G, with the vehicle-to-grid technology, you want it to give back to the electricity grid at the right time. And you want to keep track of the carbon intensity of the battery itself also. If you charge at a time where it's very bad, where the carbon intensity is high, you're basically putting inside your battery something that's very high carbon. And so that's not a good thing to give back to the grid at some point. So what you want is charge when it's cheap, low carbon, give back when the grid itself is high carbon. And we're building a consumer application right now that looks into those things. We're doing partnerships with the whole mobility industry. And so our vision is really that you should be able to connect different services to one centralized place in order to give you your personal carbon footprint of your daily activities. So the first example we have here is with electric vehicles. You would connect directly to the EV that you own at home. It would pull data directly from the electric vehicle to know when is it consuming electricity. And based on the electricity map, we know already what carbon emissions are related to the electricity that you consume. Imagine having those things scaled on all of your activities. And then suddenly I think that we can get the paradigm shift that I've been talking about, because the reason why people don't realize their carbon footprint is that it's actually quite complicated to calculate. You need to go to a website, spend a couple of hours inputting all your data. With this, we need something automated that would be much simpler. And it sparks the whole problem of the privacy in mind, and maybe we can talk about that at some point if it makes sense. But I leave it to that for me, the most important thing we need to do if we want to get customers involved is to show them exactly the impact of what they do, and it needs to be real time, because if they get the information a couple of days after, they've forgotten and they won't change behavior. Thank you.
Many thanks, Olivier. I think that was quite impressive how information, and in this case, as you mentioned, comes from the transparency platform which ENTSO-E has set up. Yeah? You take this information, you transform it and allow customers and then devices to see the carbon footprint, and the completeness in the end of the day ideally would also include carbon, or let's say climate footprint, including the food you consume, the transport this takes, and all that kind of things. But I think it's a very important start, covering transport and the energy consumption as a first thing. Yeah. So now, Bente, what is what is the contribution of the high voltage grids to the customers enabling the COP23, the COP21 maybe in a sense? Yeah.
Thank you, Susanne. First, I will say that it's great to hear initiatives like tomorrow explaining how things can be done, and we need not just one silver bullet, but we need many solutions to make sure that we achieve this climate goal. So that was very interesting to listen to. Then I need this one. Yeah, okay. So I will talk about active customers and how we prepare as transmission system operators. We are 43 transmission system operators in Europe. We are monopolies, and we are regulated, and we have the task of building grids and facilitating market development. And this is we have an organization in Brussels with about 90 people working with these tasks. I will say this because we have people from all over the world here, so the world has different ways of organizing energy, that's for sure. So I will also say a little about this. So we are committed to this energy transition, and the active customers need to be in the center. really. Many talk about protection of the customer. We need active customers, and this triangle, the politics, the policies, the markets, and the technology is a very important triangle. And I will come back to it, but I think the policies are now having the most challenging times, because we need really good and bold politicians to drive us to this energy transition. But we will be prepared, and we will, as TSOs, we build stronger grids. And it's essential to bring active customers and renewables together. It's not, we see the decentralization, it's really progressing with people installing solar and wind, but we need also to bring big volumes of renewables from one place in Europe to other places in Europe. So we are investing 150 billion euros in grids towards 2030, and this will allow us to reduce the CO2 emission significantly, also allow about 60% of the total consumption covered by RES in the mix. And when you invest €1, you get €2 back. So this is important and goes in parallel with the decentralization. We develop better markets where active customers can participate. Our goal is to have all the active customers participating in the day-ahead market, the intraday market, and the balancing market. And I'm going to talk about how we can make this happening. Because these markets are very crucial for giving this to make sure that we have active customers. And we push for better regulation. We need to link wholesale market and the retail market. And I talked to the guys from tomorrow here, and I think they feel the same. We have now in Europe a very liquid wholesale market. We have covering 80% of all Europe with day-ahead market, and 1,500 terawatt hours going around. So it's the world's largest wholesale market. But we need to link the retail market to this wholesale market. And we have some principles that need to be fulfilled. We need distributed generation and flexibility, and this requires smart meters. I don't understand how we can cope without. We need consumer access to all markets. I talked about that. Transmission system operator and distribution system operators need to ensure fully transparent markets, and we don't need separate markets. We cannot have a TSO market and a DSO market. It's a common market. And the TSOs and the distribution system operators need to determine products and business processes for this distributed flexibility. And we have now pretty many products on the TSO side. We also need DSOs to get together and make sure that we have good products on the DSO side, so we can buy from these active customers in a good way. And we need neutral bodies to run data hubs for efficient data collections and settlement. And I will say all commercial activities should be done outside, and it should not be DSOs or TSO doing commercial activities. TSOs and DSOs shall buy products and establish platform for markets. Commercial players shall sell on behalf of the active customers, or the active customers should be active. We need to ensure cybersecurity and privacy issues, so that's very evident. And then we need high-level principles in the EU regulation, and details should be in the national regulation. We don't need 2,000 more pages of regulation. We need maybe 20. I heard Klaus-Dieter Burchardt in the EU Commission says now 0 pages, but that's a little too little. So this is a very national area. You have 2,700 DSOs in Europe, and one size do not fit all. You have 700 DSOs in Germany, and maybe one large one in France, a couple of small ones. So it's very national, but we need high-level principles European-wide. So the technology already exists and can enable active customers. So that's not the problem. And how do this active customer look like? What does this active customer look like? Well, let's consider a techno-freak consumer. You see him there. He has 3 characteristics. He's a different physical setup. He generates electricity. He has a car that he wants to charge. He wants to be more efficient in his house. He has an integrated perspective. And he follows up closely, 24/7, measuring, analyzing. He is trading. He's exploring flexibility. He uses cheapest source always. So he is really busy. You see him? And certainly he's a man and an engineer. And he's active in the integrated market, buying, selling in the intraday market, etc., etc. And he hedges forward prices risk. All these things does this guy. But he is not our future active customer. This one is the future. He is, however, a typical consumer. He will relax and do his job, his regular job, and have others making sure that his home is smart. So, how can we make life easier for this consumer? And I said the technology is already there, so we will have, what we see is that we get an active consumer and he will sign a service agreement with a supplier, an aggregator, with tomorrow, whatever, and he will have this service agreement, and the customer will say, what do I get? I want an indoor temperature of 20 degrees. I want free amount of electricity for lighting, etc. 25,000 kilometers of power for my new electrical car, paid for being flexible, etc., etc. That's what I get as a consumer and customer. And my commitment is to install solar panels and batteries, being flexible between 8 and 16 during the day, and cut the temperature if the price is above this and that, and shut down the boiler and freezer for 30 minutes, once per day or 3 times per week for system services to the DSOs or TSO. All these things, it's already there as technology. So it's just to make sure that you have smart meters, you have data hubs, you have a regulation that makes sure that you have can have services from these type of companies. And then you pay an annual fee, maybe. So this is an agreement that we think we'll have more of in the future. And then I just wanted to say that active customers is already happening. We have a lot of examples, and it's already there. We have the DSR projects which demonstrate substantial benefits. We have this Nies grid, or grid. I know it's Nies, but I thought it was nice. It's Nies grid in France. Consumer flexibility during summer. 22% of daily demand moved to solar peak production hour, and during winter, 21% demand reduction during peak load. So it's already working. We have also the Finnish TSO. His test procurement of balancing products via suppliers and aggregators. I'm not going to go through all these technical details, but it's already there, and they are testing it, and they have quite a bit of demand response coming from active customers. And then the best example is this New York example. I'm sure many of you have heard about it. In Brooklyn and Queens, they had to put in, they were about to put in a substation to take the summer peak, and they needed to tear down 6 blocks of houses, and it would cost $1.2 billion to do it. Then the regulator said, this is not feasible, we should not do it, and they used $200 million and put in solar panels and got flexibility from the customers, and then they didn't have to put in a new substation. So this is already happening. So to end, we think we are prepared to serve the active customers, and we do it together with the distribution system operators and establish good regulation for the future. So, to conclude, the future is electric. Thank you for the attention.
Many thanks, Bente, I think, for this interesting insight. One can really also ask the question when the word active will be taken out of customer and everyone will be just a customer, the way you portrayed him, getting the services. Yeah, I think this was an interesting add-in to what you presented also in the beginning on, say, the customer being autark, let's say. Other opportunities, technologies are all there. So the next presentation now is Dolf Gielen from IRENA, the director of IRENA Innovation Technology Center. What about the renewables? What about the customer relation to the renewables in offsetting the climate change?
Yeah, thank you very much, Suzanne. Thank you very much for having me here today. So at the International Renewable Energy Agency, we look closely at what is happening on the consumer side, because we think it can be a key enabler for higher shares of renewables in the power mix. We do that in our Innovation and Technology Center, which is here in Bonn, and together with our 153 member countries, so we also have a bit of a global outlook on this. In this context, we had our Renewables Day on Sunday, and we had the CEO of Envision there, who talked about their platform for the Internet of Things for energy. And it was another example of where you see that the combination of renewables deployment with the digitalization we see ongoing and new ICT technology enables a lot of new developments. And as Bente said, there is a lot going on, and a lot which may impact the consumer, but we're not so sure that the consumer himself or herself really wants to do all of this. So there is an important role for an intermediary, and we see startups, we see aggregators coming up, but at the same time we see also distribution companies, we see utilities move in this area. And it will be interesting to see who in the end takes on that role. As said, there's a lot of systems being developed for smart homes that can play a role also for integrating renewables, but it's not necessarily the prime driver. I mean, the consumer is looking for comfort, maybe for some techie things to show off, maybe for economics, but I haven't seen a lot of examples where there is currently a strong economic case to move in this direction. And of course, ultimately, it can help to integrate more renewables. a lot of developments on the technology side, but we need to have also the regulations in place. And for the economics, you need to have a price signal. And right now, in many countries, it's still a flat electricity price. So where exactly is that price signal? So we see new business models emerging, either companies that provide, that guarantee 100% renewable supply, or companies that aggregate, say, home battery systems, and because of economies of scale, they're able to sell that. So these are examples of new business models. We saw the example of the Brooklyn virtual mini grid. It's another example of how ICT is playing into this and what it can mean. Behind the meter storage in Germany, there's about 60,000 such home batteries, and 1 in 2 of all new PV systems has a battery. And with such a battery, consumers are able to increase their self-consumption from around 30% to 60 to 70%. So it enables then a much higher self-consumption. Another thing I wanted to mention is corporate sourcing. So consumers, yes, of course, households are important, but also the private sector industries can play an important role. This year to date, we've seen about 2 gigawatts of corporate sourcing, direct sourcing of renewables. So companies buying electricity, having a contract with a project developer and directly buying from a project developer or from a utility, but with a contract for a specific supply. A good example was last week in Norsk Hydro was an announcement in Sweden. They had bought now the electricity of a 650 megawatt wind farm. And given that that is an aluminium company, I think that is an important signal. It's not only IT companies moving into this, it's really major electricity consumers that see this as a key opportunity to lock in low-cost renewables. And it's another form of enabling customers. Last slide, at the occasion of COP, we issued a paper on what we see as innovation needs. We see a big challenge in part of the industry, especially the materials producing, energy-intensive materials producing industries, iron and steel, cement, chemical and petrochemical, and part of the transport sector. Electrification can play an important role in these sectors, but much more development would be needed, and that could also empower these sectors to achieve much more significant emissions reduction. So, for my points, thank you very much.
Many thanks, Dolf, for showing these technological changes, and also, I think, in a way, the role of IRENA, which has now 153 members. I think it's extremely important to have all these countries on board. I would like, before we go on with Giles Dickson and with Steven Singer, to give you the opportunity to ask questions back to Olivier, Corradi, but also to Dolf and to Bente, indeed. Do you have any comments or questions to these three?
Hello, thank you very much. My name is Anna Marks. I'm an independent consultant. Thank you all for these excellent presentations. This was extremely interesting, very exciting. If you'd allow me, I would actually like to ask several questions. For tomorrow, I would like to ask you if this system is available for free to the customers. To Bente, I would like to deviate a little bit from the individual household consumer level and actually thinking of a little bit of a wider scale and thinking even of the community energy projects. And in that context, I would like to ask you a couple of questions, taking advantage of your multiple roles. First, I would like to ask you, how does the decentralized electricity generation come to play in the planning of the transmission and distribution infrastructure? And related to that, how to ensure cost optimization, not just at project level, considering, of course, that there are so many resources, renewable energy resources, local renewable energy resources, that would be to the advantage of local communities to take up. But how to ensure cost optimization, not just at project level, but at system level, considering the transmission and distribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Is there other questions?
Aribert Peters from German Association of Energy Consumers. I don't agree with the statement and that the future is all electric, because I think most of the energy consumption, also the energy consumption which is relevant to climate emissions, is not electric, and also we have a storage problem, and we have I think electricity is important, but even in Germany, where we have well-established renewable sources in electricity production, we have only 30%. And so that means we have 70% which is not renewable, and that it's not emission-free. So I think that should be combined, but it's not all electric.
Okay, so I would say, Olivier, you start to respond, and then Bente.
And I'll quickly comment on what you said, because I totally agree. And we have, if we want to be pragmatic about when we use which source of energy, and we're not talking electricity, just energy, what we need to have is this, again, this signal or this digitalization can help us take the best decision given the best time. And if you look at electric vehicles, it totally depends on how you generate the electricity. So yes, sometimes you saw maybe on the map that Australia is very black on the map. I wouldn't recommend you having an electric vehicle in Australia. If you have it in Norway or Sweden, yes, it might make sense. But again, we need to quantify those things to take the best decision, so I agree. The question about whether it's free, yes, everything is free from the consumer point of view. So you can right now go on electricitymap.org, not right now because you would distract quite a lot, but feel free to do it in other sessions. But it's totally free, and we see things as we need to illuminate the consumers. No one is willing to pay for this. We're not going to have the change on global scale if we have a price barrier to this thing. So we are quite innovative in the way we earn money. We try to we understood that data is where the value is, which is why we invest a lot in deep analytics. We do forecasting. We also do a lot of it's quite technical. We could talk about it at some point, but we look very deeply into what the marginal emission signal is on the electricity grid. So we're capable of saying, for example, in Denmark, if you charge your electric vehicle right now, or if everyone starts to charge the electric vehicle right now, is it coal power plants that get started in Germany? Is it some storage system in Norway that reacts? What would happen, right? And it can help us dimension the grid better, and we have all sorts of services we're going to develop based on this. But short answer, yes, it's free.
I'll start with this optimization challenge, and this is very interesting because people that are for decentralization, they say, well, it's going to be very cheap to use your neighbor's solar panel, and we're going to have a nice time together, and parties, and also have this energy distribution together. And I'm sure that's fine. So that's to have decentralized cooperatives, decentralized communities doing it. It's nice, and it can be efficient to buy things together, reduce. I'm from history, a cooperative girl, so I've been in the meat business in the corporation. So I think it's good. But that's one thing. Then you have the centralized system. And I think these two systems shall be developed in parallel, and they need each other. So the decentralized system is if you think it's valuable to work with your neighbors instead of delivering to the market or buying together with the neighbor, you do that. But you should not go off-grid if it's not too expensive. But you should not go off grid, because the grid is the best battery you have. So, and you can also get maybe the best prices there. So it's very important to have this optimization, that you are able to use the European market to get the best prices for your production, to get the lowest prices for your consumption, but also work together with your neighbors, maybe buying things together, optimize, delivering products to DSO, TSO together, because you can do it together. So this optimization needs to go together, and I would really not recommend to just do it with your neighbors, because you also have this market power thing that we had in the old days. It was about market power and the producer taking advantage. We cannot move back to this market power thing where you always have to trust your neighbors on the price. So you need this optimization together. And the best prices you should get if you deliver to more people or buy from more people. But it can be also valuable to do it together with your neighbors, but you have to choose when to do the right thing. I hope that was pretty clear. Then it's about this, the future is electric. And this is really not ENTSO-E's vision, but it's my company Statnett's vision. The future is electric. So I will be transparent on that. But to be honest, Germany has done a great job making sure that the prices of renewable production has gone drastically down. German consumers are using 25 billion euros every year to make sure that the production costs of renewables go down. And they are competitive, more and more competitive. And so in the future, this will be the cheapest way for energy. That's what we think. Yeah, electricity. Then you can make hydrogen from electricity. You can do all sorts of things, but the electricity consumption will increase in the future, we think.
Okay. I have also Merce for a comment on this question. Please, Merce.
Just briefly on the community energy, I think I completely agree. I think the consumer might benefit from it, and I want to make a bit, but they need to go there voluntarily, and we want to avoid a situation where you also become small monopolies of community energy. So you need to find, this balance with protection that you were speaking before. We had a lot of advances for consumers, were switching rights, ability not to pay too much fees if you switch consumers. You don't want community energies to become kind of small monopolies, but deliver what consumers expect from them. So we want to strike the right balance, at least from our consumer organization perspective. But we see them as a great tool for consumers that want to engage. And for example, what I was saying before, you might not have the money to install a rooftop immediately. And maybe if you pool money together, you might be able to install rooftop all together and benefits all of you. And maybe it's a loan, maybe someone pays more at the beginning and you put more over time. There's many financial mechanisms that you can work out. So we think them as a good thing for consumers. Maybe the second thing, and I'm bouncing back on the previous presentation, and intermediaries and aggregators. This goes the same way. We think aggregators might bring a lot of things. They might be very necessary for a lot of things. You need to make sure their interaction with consumers, because you're adding another layer, another person you need to deal with. Probably it might be your supplier, but not, which means another PhD for consumers to understand what the heck they're getting into. So you need to make sure that that's happening right. But we also don't want consumers to have to be penalized if they cannot access these aggregators, so to say. So balancing mechanisms will be very difficult, as you were saying, to access by yourself. If these aggregators are not there, you cannot penalize the consumers for not being able. So you need to make sure these aggregators, even if it's through suppliers, I'm not saying they need to be independent, can exist and deliver for consumers. and they're competitive, and consumers have choice, and then they get the best deal, so they will feel then more compelled to participate. Otherwise, they might not trust and just get off. I mean, off the grid, maybe not. I don't think anybody will do that, except very few, but less likely to want to become active.
Many thanks. I think what's interesting also in this discussion is that we see there's various ways to approach this animal active customer. Yeah, could group himself in communities. Yeah, he might not want to do 10 PhDs as to catch up with the system. Yeah, there will be various types. We're certainly coming back to this. I would like now to give the floor to Giles Dickson, who is the CEO of WindEurope. We have been talking a lot about solar, but indeed wind, especially wind onshore, has seen a fantastic learning curve. What is the value add of wind for the customer enabling COP23?
Thank you very much indeed, Susanna. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure to be here and to be sharing this panel with so many great leaders in electricity and energy in Europe and the world, of course. Dolf, forgive me. I'm going to talk mainly about industrial customers of electricity. Households are hugely important, of course, but we mustn't forget that households consume less than half of the total electricity consumed in Europe. Before I start talking about customers, a few words, if I may, about wind energy in Europe today. Wind is 11% of all of the electricity consumed in Europe today. There are 3 countries where wind is over 1/4 of electricity. That is Denmark, Ireland, and Portugal. And in this country, wind is between 18 and 20% of all of the electricity consumed. If you want to know what the share of wind in your country's electricity mix is, plug into the WindEurope website every day and you will see yesterday's figures. These figures are derived again from the ENTSO-E transparency platform, 13,000 data sets. Not only will you see the share of wind in yesterday's electricity mix, you can see the hour-by-hour electricity mix by all the fuels and technologies for your country on the WindEurope website every day. Of course, wind is variable, and so we are big fans of variable demand. It matches our variable supply. And so we are working with just about everybody on this table to plug demand response, both at household and industrial level. Just a few figures here. Europe already has 20 gigawatts of installed demand response capacity that is functioning effectively in the electricity market today. The European Commission is very confident that by 2030 that number will have risen to between 100 and 160 gigawatts of demand response capacity. To put that in perspective, that is equivalent to the total power generation capacity of Spain and Portugal. So these are very significant numbers. And you can see here all the services that demand response are offering. I will highlight here, and come back to it later, the important role of demand response also in the electrification of heating and transport, and not just in the provision of electricity in the standard form as we know it today. Right, let's start talking about industrial demand. Look at all of these companies, famous household names, and they are all consuming wind electricity as a conscious choice. Either they have invested in wind farms next to their sites, next to their factories, or they have done corporate offtake, corporate sourcing agreements that Dolf was mentioning with wind farms. And as you can see, it is a range of sectors here. Now, one common model is the model that Dolf mentioned, the Corporate Renewable Power Purchase Agreement, or Corporate Renewable PPA. Dolf has already shown us that the volume of these deals is increasing rapidly. This is how they have grown in Europe in the last few years. The color coding here shows you the different countries. As Dolf said, this began in the computer industry, the ICT sector, because the likes of Apple, Google, Facebook wanted green electricity for their data centers, big consumers of power, of course. But now it has spread to other sectors. Food and drink, Nestle, Mars have signed these deals, fast-moving consumer goods, Unilever, and now heavy industrial consumers. What is interesting is that it's still only a limited number of countries where these deals are taking place. You can see it's the Nordics, it's the Netherlands, and it's the British Isles. And this is because in many countries in Europe there are still regulatory barriers to the signing of these corporate renewable PPAs. It's legally impossible in this country, for example. Isn't that extraordinary? A country that's the leader in the energy transition in Europe today does not technically allow its industry to sign direct offtake agreements with renewable power generators. It's not clear that it's legally possible in France, although the French government is changing the law to clarify that it is, nor have there been any deals or significant deals so far in Spain and Italy. So the four key economies of the Eurozone are missing out on this at the moment. Now, why are companies signing these deals? Is it because they want to wave a flag and say, we are green? No, it is not. They are doing it out of hard business and economic sense. What they're doing when they sign these deals is they are locking in their energy costs, or a big share of their energy costs, for the long term. These deals are for 15 years, often. Okay? You reduce your exposure to volatile fossil fuel prices, you reduce your exposure to fossil fuel imports, you lock in your energy costs, or a big share of your energy costs. And of course you're locking them in with a source of electricity that is now the cheapest form of power generation. If you want to build new power generation capacity in Europe today, onshore wind is the cheapest. It's cheaper than gas, coal, or nuclear. So you're getting good deals. And for our industry, we're getting 15 years of revenue stability out of these deals. It's great for us. And economically, it's win-win between the buyer and the seller, because the industrial buyers are locking in prices that are slightly lower than the average retail industrial price of electricity, and we are getting prices that are slightly higher than the average wholesale price of electricity. So they are win-win. Some of these deals are direct, that is to say, an industrial consumer signs a deal directly with a wind farm and the electricity comes physically from that wind farm if they are co-located. Most of them are indirect. The deals are done through the wholesale market with third parties involved. There may be an agreement between the two sides that the price will be fixed, and if the buyer is having to pay a little bit more from the wholesale market, then the wind farm will compensate the buyer and vice versa. Let's just look and see who is signing these deals. Here's Microsoft, here's a wind farm in the Netherlands, and that is their data center right next door to the wind farm. This is a direct PPA, okay? Facebook, you see one of their data centers on the right. They are signing deals elsewhere in Europe that are indirect PPAs. Google have now decided that within their company, their huge company, they will co-locate those people who are responsible for sourcing electricity for the data centers and those people who are responsible for choosing where the data centers are located, which means that their huge investment decisions in where their data centers go depend now on the price they're paying for their electricity and their ability to get that electricity directly from renewables. And Google, you may know, this year is now 100% renewable in terms of the electricity that's sourcing its data centers. Let's look at some of the heavy industrial consumers. First of all, we have Alcoa, aluminium manufacturer. You mentioned Norsk Hydro, another aluminium manufacturer. Dolf, well, just last month, Alcoa, one of the other main aluminium manufacturers, signed a deal in Norway with a local wind farm. It's 280 megawatts, and that is a direct PPA. The wind farm is right next door to the aluminium smelter. Then we have the chemicals sector. Two Dutch chemicals manufacturers here, DSM and AkzoNobel, signed two indirect PPAs with wind farms in the Netherlands earlier this year. Now, this is very interesting from a political perspective as well. Because traditionally, industrial consumers of electricity have complained about how renewables have put energy prices up. But here they are now, recognizing that renewables are the cheapest and signing deals directly themselves with wind farms and sometimes with solar parks as well. And this is really changing the politics in Europe on energy. Renewables and energy-intensive industries, traditionally not natural bedfellows in the political discourse on energy, are now working together. And we recently did an event in Brussels with CEFIC, the European Chemicals Association, on these PPAs, and we are actively working together to try and ensure there can be more of these deals. Now, I said there are regulatory barriers to these deals, and I mentioned those countries where it's not possible to do these deals. You'll be pleased to hear that in the EU's clean energy package, that famous package of legislation that's currently under negotiation in Brussels, there is a clause in the Renewable Energy Directive, which is a key element of that regulation, which says, in one simple sentence, member states of the European Union shall remove regulatory barriers to corporate renewable PPAs, full stop. So those countries that don't allow these deals are going to have to allow them when the clean energy package comes into force. Now, an important element of these PPAs is that there is traceability. So the buyer wants to be sure that the electricity they're getting, if it's an indirect deal and they're getting the power out of the wholesale market and then balancing that through their agreement with the wind farm, they want to be sure that it's renewable electricity. So we have guarantees of origin that are offered by the producer and given or sometimes sold to the buyer. And there are rules about guarantees of origin. The Clean Energy Package also redefines what these rules should be in Europe. I won't bore you with the detail here, but it's important we get these rules right. And so therefore we are working with the chemicals industry and others to get these rules right in the Clean Energy Package. And we'll be working then with national governments across Europe to get these rules right as well. So that is the picture on the corporate and the industrial sourcing of electricity today. But I want to bring in a further angle to this, and it's something that the panel has already touched on, and this is the electrification of transport and heating. Look at the pie chart on the left and look at the light blue. That is electricity as a share of total energy consumption in Europe, and it's only 22%. It's very little. We tend to think energy is electricity. Well, no, it's much more. Look at the transport, that's 32% in black, and the heating is 46%. Now look on the right. In terms of the amount of renewables in electricity generation, we're doing kind of okay. We've got to get it up. We've got it to 30%. The EU wants us to get it to 50% by 2050. Fine, but we're not doing very well, as you can see, in getting electricity into heating and transport. Only 18% and 6% respectively so far. And that's got to change. Not just because I'm part of the electricity generation sector and we want to sell more electricity. No, it's got to change because if you power your transport and heating with electricity rather than with fossil fuels, your total primary energy consumption will reduce because electricity is more energy efficient for heating and transport than fossil fuels are. So this has got to move. And here we are. This is how wind can power transport. One wind turbine generates enough power for 3,000 electric vehicles or for 700 hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. And this is what is happening or could be happening on heating. We don't have to work very hard to get electricity into heating. Today, the electricity powering heating in Europe is 40 terawatt hours. We only need 15 gigawatts of onshore wind to power that. We actually have 160 gigawatts of wind across Europe today. So if we made these connections and got electricity into heating, we would be able to make a lot of rapid progress. That's really all I wanted to share with you, and I look forward to hearing what you're going to say, Stefan. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Also for providing all these updates on where we stand, and I think very interesting to see these corporate PPAs part of the package and new ways also of financing indeed next generation renewables investment, which will not see the same support as the first generation has seen. Now we move to Stefan Singer. Stefan Singer has been co-creating, co-founding RDI, and I would say RDI in itself is a very good proof how customers can be enabled. It's the cooperation of NGOs voicing their concerns or their contributions to networks, which they see as absolutely indispensable if you want to deliver the energy transition. Many thanks, Stefan, for being here.
Thank you, Susanne. Well, I have to apologize that I'm the director of the Renewable Grid Initiative, Antonella, can't come because she had a conflict with her travel booking back to Berlin. So unfortunately, I happen to be the chairperson of, so she asked me to do that in the last minute. I have no slides because I didn't have time. So I try to do this verbally. I'm the chairperson of RGI, the Renewable Grid Initiative, which was founded in 2010 and which unites TSOs, transmission system operators, grid companies, and NGOs. The TSOs from Germany, Belgium, Netherlands, France, Croatia, Ireland, Spain, and a couple of others in that RGI coalition represent about roughly 55% of European electricity consumption. It's quite large. And we have about 16 NGOs in there, including the biggest one, and in particular also Climate Action Network, which is the umbrella organization of basically all NGOs working on climate issues. And I'm personally working for Climate Action Network International. So I'm representing some of the NGOs, or most of the NGOs in that board and in RGI, and it's a useful thing. We work mainly on acceptance issues. We work on issues of support for credible, clever and smart existing grid enhancement for preparing for the future energy revolution, in this case in the electricity sector. And we have not agreed on 100% renewables in that club. Well, that might come up. We have seen over the time lots of progressive positioning of TSOs towards much higher renewable energy in the grids than is currently being projected by the incoming legislation in Europe. So I think we have the job to move the envelope. What we are doing, we support principally grid-based solutions, both centralized and decentralized. So we believe in large-scale, let's say offshore wind, as well as some small-scale decentralized community-owned wind, or even on and rooftop solar. So everything has a place. When we want to go to maximum / 100% renewables by earlier than 2050 in the electricity sector, which is a paramount requirement if you take the Paris objectives. If you take the Paris objective as an imperative, staying well below 2 degrees or 1.5 C requires a full decarbonization of the energy sector by 2050. I think everyone says that one. And that might require even an earlier decarbonization of the electricity sector, in particular in rich countries like Europe. I don't want to talk too much about the RGI and CAN here. I want to use the opportunity to talk a little bit about the role of customers. So much has been said, very interesting thing, and a couple of issues which I think, and what we believe as CAN, is important in order to frame the pathway to a maximum amount of renewable energy penetration and not limited to electricity. First of all, we believe that you have to have in policy making, in order to get acceptance, in order to get understanding and to get engagement, work in a triangle. The triangle is basically on the top you have ambition, and then you have the need for regulation. And I'll come back to that one. And on the other side of the triangle, third side, you have the issue of transparency and monitoring. It's very important. That it's monitored what's possible, what has been done, and is it transparently done in a way to basically activate and persuade customers that they are part of the game. One word about customers. And as Giles has said very correctly, and Dolf as well, customers are individual citizens, but not limited to that one. They're cities, they're businesses, they're universities, they're actors on their own, in short, non-state actors. Now we have seen, and I don't want to go much into detail here, but we have seen about 120 companies worldwide picking up 100% renewable energy targets, mainly electricity. We have seen 25 universities doing the same, recently the first Japanese university. We know about between 150, depending on the counting, 150 to 400 cities worldwide, Vancouver, Hamburg, San Francisco, to name but a few, which have been committed to a full decarbonization or and 100% renewables by sometime between 2040 and 2050, some earlier. The actor DiCaprio was and is still a big ambassador for that move of cities. They work with ICLAI, with the G40 and the Sarah Club. It's interesting, it's very much focused not only, but very much also taken up in the US. I think as a matter of despair, given the kind of very intelligent government which is currently in the White House. So non-state actors in the US are trying to dissociate themselves from the mood in the US, which is apparently, which is not apparently, but is obviously stagnating the country. And that's a good move, but it's not only the US. We have seen also the finance sector in working on divestment from fossil fuels. And the finance sector, the private finance sector, is the largest funder of most energy investments. It's not the public sector. The private sector is responsible for most of fossil fuel funding, but also most of renewable funding, let's be honest. We have seen companies like the Norwegian Wealth Fund, the biggest sovereign wealth fund in the world with assets of more than 1 trillion, divesting from coal, and now they look into oil. And that's a big thing. Although the coal assets were not very much, they were only about, if you have more than 1 trillion assets, they were only about 40 billion value. It's a lot of money, but for them it's not that much. And they're looking into reinvesting this in renewables. Gives a big, big message to the market, to the coal market. BNP Paribas, one of the largest francophone Belgian banks, ABN AMRO, etc., and others. Also Munich Re, reinsurers, starting to divest away from fossil fuels into renewables and energy efficiency. However, that's great things. However, the non-state actors' activities have been calculated by SOA analysis, by UNEP and others. If you take them together and assuming they would comply with their targets, they would reduce global CO2 emissions by roughly 500 to 600 million tons of CO2. That sounds big. It's about 1% of global CO2 and CO2 equivalent emissions. So the result is non-state actors' activities, as important as they are, do not replace any kind of regulation, state actor, standards, laws, and rules. I think that's very, very important, and that's reflected, and it's a pity that Aribert has gone, that's reflected also in the trend. If we look into, there you are, sorry, I saw you sitting there. It's the investments in renewables, which we all praise to be about 280 billion now, by the way, they're stagnating, coming from almost zero 10 years ago. And I add the investments in demand-side efficiency, also about 260 billion. It's about 560 billion US per year, more or less the same as they have been 2 years ago at the time of the Paris Agreement, when countries not only ratified, but also entered into force the treaty. The investment numbers have not grown, but the investment numbers for fossil fuels have been also remaining stagnant. But they are twice as much as the investment numbers in renewables and energy efficiency combined, mainly in oil and gas, mainly in the non-electricity sector, oil and gas for heat, for transport, for industrial fuels, etc., etc. The investments in coal are not that big because coal is not that capital intensive, it's mainly labor intensive. So the change in the international financial market, a change towards an energy revolution, towards a great transformation, I must say, despite the very good and acknowledgeable first steps, I'm not saying. Not in the speed that we need to see to comply with the Paris agreements. And the UNEP folks have said very clearly, world governments have roughly to triple their efforts in terms of decarbonization to have a chance to be on a trajectory towards well below 2 degrees or /1.5 degrees C. I think we need to keep that in mind, that despite all the wonderful examples, this is too little. I'm not saying too late. We need to have more. I think that's very important. The future is electric, 1 point. Well, yes and no. I believe we need to be careful. Although we have been promoting electrification all the time, and of course electrification has huge opportunities. The point is, do we use then as storage increasingly batteries? There's more and more research coming out pointing to the fact of the ecological and carbon, but not only carbon footprint of I would say, batterification of the economy. It's rare earths, it's more copper, etc., etc. It's dirty mining, dirty extraction, it's seabed mining under the sea for getting all these very rare earths, the name says it, for getting all these minerals and materials out for batteries, etc., etc. If we talk about 1 billion cars, all with batteries, and then we add lorries, we add public transport, and then we add heating devices, this is very material intensive. And I'm not talking about the minerals we need also for ICT, for our iPhones, for flat screen TVs. Yeah, so I think, let me give you the, if I might, regulation, my last point. Regulation, very important. Worldwide, 70% of all energy use is not regulated, either by standards or by legislation or by policies, not regulated. That's 70% of global energy use. However, 175 countries have renewable energy targets and policies. Many have not been applied or implemented, unfortunately. Nelson Mandela has once said, the biggest renewable resource is, not solar, not wind, not geothermal, the biggest renewable resource is political will. And it has been vastly underexploited, also here at this COP. And I think we need to keep that in mind, and let's prove that Nelson Mandela is wrong. And we basically encourage more political will, more regulation, more legislation to come to a strong decarbonization pathway worldwide for the best of the consumer, all consumers, because I think they deserve good regulation. Thank you.
Thanks, Stefan. Also to introduce, reintroduce the political dimension. We are running over time. However, as we started a little later, I would like to give you the opportunity to ask last questions. I could take two questions to our speakers, and I also have to apologize. Olivier Corradi unfortunately had to leave us already. Is there anyone who would like to comment or ask a question, also including from our panelists? Is someone wanting to respond back to what has been said by other panelists? Okay, this doesn't seem to be the case. Sorry, okay.
Hi, Jonathan Bosch from Imperial College London. Mainly a question for Giles, I think, but maybe anybody else can answer as well. Seen as wind, I was really interested to see about the PPAs coming out from companies. My question is, what do you see the role of interconnectors in the fact that wind resources aggregated together actually give quite a reliable electricity generation, and maybe interconnectors instead of batteries, or as well as batteries, can help in that.
Interconnectors are hugely important. The EU's targets are not ambitious enough, 10% by 2020, 15% by 2030. We ideally would have more than that, but you can't do interconnectors on their own. You need to combine interconnectors with storage and with demand response and with properly functioning electricity markets, more intraday trading with short gate closure times. Okay, so those are the four things you need to do to integrate variable renewables. There is a fifth that people talk about, and that is the backup capacity, but it's the least important of the five. Yeah, certainly in terms of managing costs.
I just can, I think you're totally right on your answers, Giles, but we discussed, or we analyzed in ENTSO-E if we can solve this backup problem with more interconnectors, and it ended up you can do maybe solve 15%, 20%, but it's also limited because you have the wind is blowing almost at the same speed in regions, so it's not easy to build out. So you build you out of this situation. So you need this 3 or 4 things, but you need more interconnectors, and that's what we're building. We are, just an example, we are doubling the capacity between the Nordic and the continent for the time being. So this is going to, we will build, and the most important place we need interconnectors, do you know where it is? It's in Germany, from north to south. That is really Germany has done a great job when it comes to renewables. We talked about it. It's not good that we don't have reinforcement from north to south. It's really a very tough time for all the countries around and also for Germany. So this needs to be solved.
Yes, I mean, we would also support the need for interconnectors. But the point is, I think that the notion should not be interconnectors would solve the issue of the lack of capacity of renewables, so we can import, or lack of or increased overcapacity we can export. Because you could assume that all countries build up their renewable energy base, and then all might come to a limit, right? So that's the reason for storage, to a large extent. Probably not now, but storage is the key issue. I don't think it's backup. Storage, again, that's why I mentioned electrification, could be done with renewable gas, for instance. You would avoid curtailment. You would use the excess capacity of solar in very sunny days, or the excess capacity of wind in very windy days, and put that into gas, for instance, and this would be long-term storage. The grid per se, sorry, Bente, I have to say that. The grid per se, I don't think it's a storage place. The grid is a way to most cost-effectively accommodate and distribute excess renewable electricity when you don't need it domestically or regionally. That's why interconnectors are very important, right? But they don't solve the problem per se. But give an example from one of our members from 50 Hertz in Germany, of our RGI members. 50 Hertz in Germany is serving about 25 million customers in northern Germany. They have currently 50% renewable energy in the grid. Well, it's not the classical renewables like hydro and biomass, which are easy to manage. It's mainly wind and solar. 50%. No blackouts, no brownouts, and they have no backup at this point in time. It's good management. It's also ICT. You know, information technology management, using weather data, GIS, it's good computerization. 50 Hertz is employing currently more IT people than engineers.
Thank you. I think this was good answers. We should maybe nevertheless also emphasize that networks is not only storage. I would definitely disagree with you on that one, Stefan. Networks is really this fourth industrial revolution everyone is talking about, and it's including the ICT networks, it's including the physical networks, and it's about distribution of welfare across Europe and beyond. Yeah. So in wrapping this up, first of all, in finding answers on this question, active customers enabling COP23, I think we found out that today already there's multiple opportunities and multiple possibilities for customers to be active, and they do it already. The technology is there. Sometimes there is a missing information problem, and companies like Tomorrow certainly are helping here, and this needs to be amplified. I think that BEUC is doing a very important job, and it's interesting to see that you have been upgrading your energy department recently, understanding how important it's exactly that the customers play the role they deserve to do. I think in the future, it's clearly an opportunity also for you, BEUC, to get these different opportunities we have been seeing here from Giles, Dickson, what's going on in IRENA, in ENTSO-E, in RGI, somehow bundled, and to convey these opportunities to BEUCs, to the customers you are representing. So last but not least, if you want to get the presentations which have been shown today, Natalia, who I in this en passant want to thank for having organized this event for all of us. Many thanks, Natalia. We'll have a list of people you can sign up, and then we send you the presentation. We also want to invite you to another webinar in this case, next January, talking about active customer, vulnerable customer, involving ENTSO-E, BEUC, and several other MEPs participants. Many thanks for having been there. Many thanks to all our speakers.